Welcome, everybody. It wouldn't be me if I didn't do that, right? It just wouldn't be me. So welcome to Late Show, the Keepers of the Light. We've only got a couple of more to go after this. Sorry, and thank you. We've only got a couple more to go after this episode. This is episode 8, and then we're only going up to 10, and then we're pulling this particular series in favour of another new series, which I've got a number of options there, and I'm trying to decide which meaty little bit of excitement we can bring forward for the next time, or whether I might do something a little bit more interactive. But I do need to tell you now that the next series will open in a new time slot, because I absolutely need it to. So as we stand here, the Mithraic Mysteries, oh my gosh, if you haven't heard of it, it's huge, it's big, it's dead, but it had a whole life that was really infused and filled and part of these things like the Chaldeans. We've got Christianity growing and booming through this time. So as such, we've got a period of time, we've got a belief system. I don't even know that it's a belief system, to be honest. It's a definite philosophy. It was a definite underground. And you can't help but sort of think, we all think of modern spirituality as being something that's in the face of Christianity, if you like, or it's a separate way to follow our God, our belief, whatever that might be. But it's always existed. There's always been a multitude of philosophies out there, as well as a number of different religions, which, of course, traditionally beat themselves up. Now, before there was war with religious factions, before that came along, the wars were all land grabs, regardless of what anybody wanted to pretend. And it was only a bit later that war was actually determined by religious belief. Back in the day, back in these times, a couple of hundred years before the birth of Christ, and for a few hundred years afterwards till Constantine came along, the tendency was for individuals to kill each other for religious grounds or on religious grounds, rather than countries chasing each other down. So everything was pretty much a land grab. And what I love about the Mithraism Mysteries is the fact that there's just enough that we know about them to be excited by what they were doing. And the amount of energy and effort they put into it shows you it wasn't a fly-by-night moment where everybody joins a cult, which is often referred to as a cult, where everybody joins this cult, goes and hides away so nobody can see them, and then dumps it as soon as something better comes along. It's far, far, far from that. Now, what you're seeing here is the depiction of Mithra, whose origin nobody seems to be really clear about, so we'll let that one sit. I'm not going to go into the potentials. But it was a Roman time, and the followers that worshipped the Iranian, Indo-Iranian type, deities, I suppose, we're really an interesting bunch. And there were a lot of these deities around. There were a lot of these interesting organizations, gods, groups, goddesses around. But Akkadian texts are the oldest texts known to man. Just so as we get that, they are the Sumerian texts, the Akkadian texts, the oldest writings known to man. And the word Mithra, now, this is the key here. I don't think this man is a man at all or a god at all. I think that's a modern spin, a Christianity spin, if you like, where a lot of the writings about these come from. The word Mithras means contract. That's it. It means contract. So it seems like a very odd name to give a deity if you want to look at this as a deity. And when I research these things, and when I've read about Mithraism, and when I've read about Zoroastrianism, when you look at the interpretations spun and put onto them over the years, that's old interpretations, modern interpretations, you can't help but think that there's an agenda in how it's seen, because you've got an organization that for a couple of thousand years has wanted everybody to follow one God, one rule, one style. And it's not just Catholicism. There was the Muslims before that, which does predate. There's the Hindus before that. They all predate Christianity. Buddhism before that, while they had multiple gods and deities, they were their own. They didn't really go outside. But they were accepting of other peoples. And this is key, because in Greece it was the same, and in the Roman times it was the same. People went to the temple of their choice. And what they went for was entirely up to them. And yes, I thought you might like that, the word contract. This is one of those things that I think influences modern spirituality, how we channel information, where it comes from. If it's existed before, if it's been written about before, if it's had a number of followers that have created an energy bubble, if you like, an energy that can be read from any age, can be channeled, can be informed. It would not be too far to think of a channel as bringing forward these kinds of information. And then, of course, modifying it, I suppose, ad-libbing to suit their own belief. The word contract and Mithra is seen as a friendship, contract, order, all of those things put together. So you're talking about brotherhood. You're talking about maintaining a system, an agreement between yourself and whatever it is. It first appeared in the late first century as a written organization. It was written by somebody else, but in actual fact, it started quite a bit before that. It grew very, very quickly once it got started, once it got underway. I don't like calling it a cult, but, it's referred to as a cult. And it was like the Eleusinian mysteries, which sort of have disappeared. There's no writings about those at all. So everybody knows it happened. They know what some of their temples look like, but they don't really know what it was about. It was a secret one. This was about secrecy. This was about maintaining order through a very small, select group of people, maintaining a belief, if you like, maintaining an energy. I'm not so sure that they were secretive because they were under the radar as such, but more secretive because they had a specific purpose. This group was tolerated by authorities, therefore they weren't being persecuted, so they didn't need to be secretive because of that. The Roman emperors were happy with them because Mithraism actually favored imperial power, which makes sense because it was essentially Roman anyway. There were over 200 Mithra temples that have been found. Now that's a lot when you're going back a couple of hundred years before Christ was born. To have a couple of hundred temples devoted to one particular philosophy is phenomenal, especially in an environment where there are temples all over the place devoted to different gods and goddesses. So while the temple numbers might be there, the actual numbers for one god or one goddess might not. They dug these amazing caves into the side of cliffs. So that's what I meant when I said it wasn't just a fly by night. There's a lot of energy in digging a hole in a cliff and turning it into a temple, even if it's fairly small. But there was the temples have been found stretching from Syria to Britain. They're across Europe. I'm going to show you one that's in Germany. Still to this day, it's there. They're in Rome. They're on the Rhine. They're in the Danube. They're all over the place. And there was a crisis of the 3rd century after Jesus' death, AD, with the establishment of Christianity, which I've talked about before, where the Bible was put together by Constantine, and if you don't know much about that, then we will look a bit more at it a little bit while, but I have talked about it before because it is so important. I do get very tired of listening to people sprout the Bible when they have no idea what they're sprouting, and in the day of Google sprouting, they don't even read the blasted thing. They just go in and find something and shove it on out there as if they've read it and understood the whole thing. If you read the whole Bible, it's got some amazing, interesting stories in it, and it's got some things in it that are definitely a no-no. One would wipe those out of the Bible just through sheer compassion, if one had compassion. But there's a crisis at the time, and there's a whole lot of murder and mayhem amongst different philosophies, different beliefs, and the Mithras themselves sort of diminished in importance. A lot of their temples were walled up and destroyed by the Christians as they came out of the woodworks. It was a very trying time for anybody who wasn't a Christian because they had the Roman stamp at that point. Well, by 300 years after, 300 years after Christ's death, the Roman stamp, which is the imperial stamp, it's the power. These are the crusaders, the soldiers. These are the might of the world at that time, is putting all of their energy behind one particular piece of work, one particular philosophy, not because they believe in it. It's very political what they did there. They got sick, quite simply sick. And Constantine actually wrote this, fed up with the individual leaders killing their groups and sects, killing people who had other beliefs. This temple here, hang on, is it the next one? No, this temple here is I don't know, as Roman or European, not European, as Eastern as it may look, is actually in the German city of Saarbrücken. And people can go and have a look and walk into it. And I've got some internal shots of an Italian temple as well. Now, the bull sacrifice relief is the typical thing that you'll see around this, and I found hundreds of them. They were always placed at the end of the temple, which was essentially built like a stretched-out Roman dining room. So there was definitely a strong Roman influence in this belief system. And it was an aisle flanked by two broad raised benches, and the sacrifice of the bull was rarely enacted upon by the worshippers themselves. In fact, it's believed today that there may never have been an actual sacrifice of the bull, and I'll explain that to you later. But once upon a time, there was a Catholic scholar who determined what the Mithras were doing, and in that he nominalized or marginalized what they were trying to do and what their achievements were. And it was a very common thing to do, to make something else look worse so that what you're offering looks better. The idea that there was sacrifice in the Celts was also put forward by the Christians, by the way, and the Romans. And so you're going, yeah, no, we know they didn't do that. So it's a very broad-ranging, what would you call it, a political propaganda machine doing its job. Worshippers did imitate how Mithras shared the bull's meat with the soul, which is the sun, as fragments of dishes and bones of animals that have been found in these temples testify, but high-quality pork rather than beef, chicken bones and large quantities of wines were consumed, and probably had pretty high spirits going with that. I mean, let's face it, it's a manly thing. Connected to worshippers, to each other, to Mithras. Whenever we look at these secret societies, there's always some kind of, naughtiness going on inside there, isn't there? There's always something that just shows you where it shouldn't be, what shouldn't be going on. It's a blokey thing. There were strict rules, though. They were not really mucking around. They had strict rules as to how a feast was organised. For example, hygiene was incredibly important. Now, if we go to Europe and we go to England through the medieval times, hygiene was out the window. The Romans were always hygienic. They always had water systems. They always believed in cleanliness, washing hands, doing things correctly. But somehow they got lost by the way. Even though they never lost it over here, it got lost in Europe. A large amount of Europe, which became very, very dirty, very, very messy. That's really interesting, though. The 7 degrees of initiation that they had was from Corax, which is the raven. So we've got some very well-known symbols, which I know are reflected in modern spirituality today. We've got Pater, which is the father, which could be easily the high priest of the tarot. We've got, and the raven is always depicted in, in full, in the original full card of the tarot. Each father or each pater has its own type of clothing. The other degrees were nymphos, believe it or not, which is the bridegroom. It was a masculine philosophy. Miles, which was the soldier. And please notice you've got the word miles as in distance, and you've got the word soldier. That's the same meaning, miles, soldier. That's where it comes from. Leo, the lion, there's definitely the lion aspect in there. Perses, which is Persian, it is definitely in there that there's some kind of Eastern connection to all of this. And then we've got Heliodromus, which is the sun runner. And each degree of initiation had a different task to fulfill. For example, this is at the feast. The raven had to carry the food while the lions offered sacrifices to the father. There was a tradition of, or a belief in, issuing, and which you see across again and again and again through different ancient rituals and spirituality. You see them doing away with earthly things, and you see that reflected in modern spirituality. The idea is to not want earthly things. You can have it, but you shouldn't want it before your God. You shouldn't want it more than you want happiness. You shouldn't want it more than you want your soul, if you like, to be pure. The initiates also had to partake tests of courage, and I believe this could be very much heading into what was, because we're going 600 years BC, what became the Olympic Games, because they, interestingly enough, had this test of courage, which was amazing. An initiate, for example, would be blindfolded and naked, which, of course, we all miss now, don't we? There's no naked Olympics. I think that's wrong. is led to the ceremony by an assistant, and later the initiate has to kneel before the father, who holds a torch or a sword in his face, right in his face. And finally, he stretches out on the floor as if he had died. This probably was a ritual of suicide in which the initiate was killed with a non-lethal theatre sword and was then reborn. But it's a ritual that essentially in Christianity becomes that same ritual of rebirth, that same within life. So you're talking about baptism, if you like. There are ritual baptisms throughout what the Romans considered to be important. You had to give something of yourself away to be able to advance to this next level. Tertullian was a writer for Christianity, Christian writer, and he writes that in 200 AD, after Jesus has died, a crown is placed on the initiate's head, which he has to reject, saying, "Mithra is my true crown." And this too was thought of as a ritual of reincarnation, which started a new life for the initiate. So you're coming in there and you're giving away your old life and you're establishing a new life. And you'll see this through many secret organizations, including the Masons, where you say that it doesn't matter about your father, your mother, and the rest of the world out there. Your first loyalty, your fealty is to this organization, to this group, to this belief, not necessarily to the God of that. When Mithra is a contract, essentially, it becomes a very open question as to what your commitment is, and you may be contracted to spiritual evolution, to an era, an age, which is pretty phenomenal, actually, I think, anyway. The earliest documented followers of Mithras were soldiers and officers. There were later on bureaucrats and politicians, but it started off being the people that fought. They were the men that went out and fought, and they had their own spiritual understanding, and they didn't want the wishy-washy thing. You know, they didn't want to go and have somebody bathe their feet and then bow down to Aphrodite or some female goddess. They were not interested. These are manly men, and they go out and they slay people for a living, and they're proud of it, and they die proud of it. There's no regret in them because this is what they do, and are honoured for that. And so we have a bull slaying thing going on, which, starts to make quite a bit of sense. But there's a rising popularity of this group of people because they also freed slaves out of cities, but women were excluded. So, it's just another one of the same old, I guess, when it gets to those. It shows an early ideal, though, of not attaching to earthly things. And ironically, it's the antithesis of modern religion, where making money off the poor is a day-to-day part of virtual any practice, and the house of God being more important than the well-being of the people. Huge amounts and huge resources across the world are spent on temples and not given to the people who are starving. There's something intrinsically wrong with that, right? And until we look at that and go, even if you believed in the rest of it, that's wrong. You've got to ask questions. And here you have a cult who's got their own money and they're going out and using it to help the poor. I can't. In general, I do tend to think of this as something to do with how things go from the perspective of the Robin Hood story. And while there are a lot of people who believe that never happened and there are people who believe that did, it's a parable at the very least of how things go. Now, this next slide is the Constantine period, and this is the original, are you ready, transcript for the Bible. It's a very well-known document. It's a very well-known ideal. The period where Constantine, he ordered the various religious leaders, obviously, to stop killing each other, but he also commissioned, when they put their writings together, their texts, there's 300 to 400, nobody's exactly sure, they burned everything that wasn't selected by these religious leaders, and they were not Christians. Some were, some weren't. So they were all dumped together. Constantine said, sort your stuff out, I'm sick of this, we want one people to have one people, we need to have one organised belief system. And if you weren't killing each other, it wouldn't matter, but because you are, kaboom. Now, he was known to go and make offerings at different temples. So there's a lot of questions about how religious he really was, what his belief systems were. But the general consensus seems to think that Constantine himself wasn't particularly a believer at all, that he did what was politically correct. And that makes a good emperor, actually, is that you don't show favoritism, right? And I think he was a very broad-minded man, where he was saying what all of you are saying and believing is secondary to the fact that you're killing each other. And that is, of course, against the tenets of any and all religion, any and all spirituality are brought down and changed by that whole tenet, that whole ideal. He commissioned 50 of these. So you can imagine they're handwritten. And the man who put it together, his name was Eusebius, who wrote his record. I have thought it expedient to instruct your prudence to order 50 copies of the sacred scriptures. This is from Constantine to Eusebius. The provision and use of which you know to be most needful for the instruction of the church, to be written on prepared parchment in a legible manner and in a convenient portable form. My professional transcribers thoroughly practiced in the art. Such were the emperor's commands, which were followed by the immediate execution of the work itself, which we sent him in magnificent and elaborately bound volumes of a threefold and fourfold form. So that's what they look like. And for all of those who think that it may not be there in its original form, it really is. And if you want to have a good look at that, you might be interested to see the actual language there. The most important element of the myth behind Mithraic mysteries was, in fact, the bull. And this is where I get right into it. They found these reliefs in nearly every temple, often shown as he wrangles the bull to the ground and he kills it. But in actual fact, you're not really seeing him kill the bull, I don't think. I've looked at a lot of these, and I don't think I've seen him actually kill the bull at all. But Mithras does wear what Romans believe to be typical Persian chic. So the suggestion is that he was possibly Persian, except that there's nothing in Iran or Iranian history that follows the bull slaying except for one reference. And one reference could be enough if it evolved into another space. The Phrygian cap and pants, which Romans did not wear, is in actual fact they didn't wear. And around 650 of these stone reliefs have been found, and they are all very, very similar. So there's got to be a template, there's got to be an original picture, there's got to be an original something that they're copying from, as the similarities are beyond compare. Even the position of the bull and how he's sort of subdued is the word really. This is a particularly beautiful relief, and that's in the museum of, I think it's Germany, but I'm not sure. Absolutely stunning piece, quite large, by the way, not small at all. And again, another relief here. You can see the hat and you can see the clothing is not Roman. This is a painting depicting it again. It's quite a fascinating thing, and how it would have sat inside, the relief would have sat inside at the very end of the temple. This is the inside of the temple. Really quite an amazing thing, but I want to talk about tauroctony, because that's what it's called when you kill bulls. I'm feeling victimized, being Taurian and such. But it's very, that was the Roman Germanic Museum in Cologne. Sorry. This one here, back here. I go all the way back. That one there is the Roman Germanic Museum in Cologne. So we've got these things spreading a very long way, actually. So this is the inside of a temple. I've got another shot that's a little bit clearer than this one, but it's pretty amazing. I mean, I would just love to go inside one of these things just to feel the energy in there. It would be amazing. But tauroctony, sorry. You too. Welcome, Alan. It would be an amazing feeling. And they're not huge. They're built as a fairly shallow sort of tunnel where you're probably easily upright. And then you've got these two rows where people sit. Every figure found has a parallel amongst a group or constellation. And this is what was discovered many years after it was decided that it was actually a Persian god cult thing, was that the tauroctony itself, and the dog, all of the image, all of the representations in the relief have a constellation aligned with them. But the dying bull is looking away. Mithras is looking away from the dying bull. So if we have a look at the relief, so we just want to clarify how that's going. Mithras looking away from the dying bull, usually up to a moon. So here's your moon, there's your dying bull. In addition, Mithras has a few helpers that assist him. Usually there's a few. Now you can see little bits. If you ever look at these, you can actually see remnants of the devil card, where you've got the people feeling controlled, but you're not controlled kind of a thing. There's also, to help, they want to take the bull's fertility. A dog and a snake drink from the bull's blood, and a scorpion stings the bull's scrotum. You know, it's all a bit dramatic. Also, a raven sits on the bull's tail that typically ends in ears of grain. And the raven could have played a role as a mediator between Mithras and the sun god, but that being an aside, every single figure found in these has a constellation. So you've got the bull is paralleled by Taurus, the dog by Canis Minor, the snake by Hydra, the raven by Corvus, the scorpion, of course, by Scorpio. And we need to really go back to understand what their belief was in the cosmos, to understand and not buy into all of this rubbishy writing that I see these days in these articles that put things in the wrong, hiya, Christy, they put things in the wrong frame, you know, because they're based on modern knowledge, not the knowledge that they had back then. So with all that goes on through there, with their temples, it becomes, there's the inside again. Here we go. This is another internal, see all of these little areas here, so you could stand behind here, or they had tops on them, you could sit on them. Quite an interesting thing, always with the major iconic descriptions at the end. So they were narrow, they were low, really, really fascinating stuff. And then, of course, we come back to our reliefs again. Now, the Greco-Roman astrology, it's understanding that is a really powerful thing. In general, it's pervaded by an explicit astronomical imagery. There's stars all around. I'll make that bigger so you can have a look at it. You see there's stars all around Mithra's head. You see all the stars there. There's definite connotations. There's just Scorpio having a good go at his scrotum. Oh, I'm sorry. Shouldn't laugh. That's my immaturity flying on out there. I'm just trying to find his tail. There's his tail, which becomes a sheaf of wheat. Okay. So there's a whole pile of stuff that goes on. We forget that imagery is not what you think. Imagery is symbology. And if you understand symbology, and if you understand it really well, you get an opportunity to really understand what this means and why is it the same at all of these temples. Why is there no real change in the description of it? It's the stars around his head, you know, it's just says that there's a numerous astronomical understanding. There's a connection between astronomy, the cosmos, and Mithras, which makes sense as well, since we are talking about Taurus, the Tauronic tauroctony. I'm going to be going around, I'm going to have nightmares about tauroctonies. You know, this is what you call it when you murder a Taurian now. It's going to be a tauroctony, because the murdering of the bull, the killing of the bull. Now, I don't doubt, too, that these kind of ancient understandings possibly led to the bull fights, whether you like them or not. They exist, and there's a time-honoured tradition behind them, and it's a respectful one rather than a cruel one as it's been made out to be today. Do I like it? No, I'm just saying. It's their thing, not my thing. But I eat fish, right? I kill and eat fish. In addition, numerous ancient authors speak about astronomical subjects in connection with Mithraism. And in the writings, Neoplatonic philosopher Porphyry, please note Porphyry, in Māori, a porphyry is a calling of spirit, did you know? So although these things are spelled different and they look different and they sound the same, and they look different and they're spelled differently, when I hear these words and I hear their pronunciation, I quite often think, oh, that's Polynesian. A porphyry is calling in a spirit. So anyway, Porphyry, for example, we find recorded a tradition that the cave, which is depicted in the tauroctony, and which the underground Mithraic temples were designed to imitate, was intended to be an image of the cosmos. And it makes sense if you go into a dome, right? Any dome, to look at the stars. You know, what do you call those things where they shine the sky on the ceiling and inside the dome? And everybody sits around inside these things, and you have a look at the stars. And so the suggestion has been made that the shape of these, which is a curved tunnel, was exactly for that, to give them that whole impression of the cosmos, of the world around them, the universe, if you like. Porphyry was a vampire-type disease way back, but I didn't know how that's spelled. Well, that's actually how it's spelled. That's this man's name. That's this man's name. So he's a writer, a Roman, Greco-Roman author, scholar, writing about the movement of Mithraism. The cosmology of the universe was a different thing back then. So if we forget what we know, okay, forget that we know that the Earth's spinning on an axis, forget that we know that we're going loopity-loop around the sun, and get back to what they knew. And they knew that in their mind, they knew that they knew, bearing that in mind, that it was imagined as being bounded by a great sphere which the stars arranged in the various constellations were attached. So while today we understand the Earth rotates on its axis every day, in antiquity it was believed that instead that once a day the great sphere of the stars rotated around the Earth, spinning on an axis that ran from the sphere's north pole to its south pole, not the Earth's north pole and south pole. As it spun, the cosmic sphere was believed to carry the sun along with it, resulting in the apparent movement of the sun around the Earth once a day. They believed that. And so as they believed that, all of their depictions are going to represent that to a certain extent. In addition to this daily rotation of the cosmic sphere, saying that fast would go horribly wrong, carrying the sun along with it, the ancients who attributed a second slower motion to the sun, while today we know that the Earth revolves around the sun once a year. In antiquity it was believed instead that once a year the sun, which was understood as being closer to the Earth than the sphere of the stars, travelled around the Earth, tracing a great circle in the sky against the background of the constellations. A phenomenal idea, and I can see why they believe that, because they're standing here and they're watching these things move around above them. We've all done it, right? You watch these things moving around above you. If you sit outside for 2 hours, you will see everything move. So it makes it common sense to understand that they would believe that. What they did know was that something was moving, but they just didn't realize it was them. So if we carry on with that whole tracing this great circle against the sky theme, the circle traced by the sun during the course of the year was known as, are you ready? The zodiac. So 600 BZ, we have them with this word that we now use as a common, predictive, interesting, influential system. And it's used predictively as well as for personal guide. But the zodiac, as a word, it means living figures. So they were seeing these constellations as figures, as the bull, as the ram, all the things that we're used to. And they were seeing them as moving across the sky, which, when you think on that, makes it quite different to it's static out there somewhere. It was a reference to the fact that the sun moved along the circle of the zodiac. So you've got like a belt, if you like, and this belt is what the sun's moving along. And of course, on this belt, there are all these constellations. The constellations that were named and known. The ancient Chinese had representations of them. They had ram's heads. They had the bull. So wherever you could see these from, and they're doing this pretty much with the naked eye, wherever you could see these from, this determined a lot of information for them. There were, and they knew that there were the 12 different constellations which were represented as having various animal and human forms. There was an equator. This thing had an equator. And they called it a celestial equator. So just as the Earth equator is defined as a circle around the Earth, equidistant from the North and South poles, so the celestial equator was understood as a circle around the sphere of the stars, equidistant from the sphere's poles. The circle of the celestial equator is seen as having a particularly special importance because of the 2 points where it crosses the circle of the zodiac. For these 2 points are the equinoxes. So it's perfectly accurate except that they just didn't quite understand which things were moving and which things were too far away for that movement to be seen, if you like. The first day of spring and autumn, actually, not summer and winter. It's those two. So the first day of spring and the first day of autumn. And the celestial cradle was responsible for defining the seasons and hence had a very concrete significance. And this is what we're going to go for, the concrete significance of having a tauroctomy or a Taurian representation for the Mithras. In their symbolism, and I've got a few things here, these were found in temples and photographed. They had the mosaic one, that's the top left here, the spade, the sistrum, and the lightning bolt. That's a musical instrument of the percussion family. You've got the rhythmic shaking of the sistrum, if you like the tambourine. It's associated with religious and ecstatic events, so that meant that they clearly used sound, they clearly used music. It's easy to add things up when you start to understand what they've got going. The lightning bolts are, of course, symbols of Zeus, but they're also symbols of Jupiter, the king of the gods, and Jupiter, the planet, by the way. The mosaic number 2, which is the top right, which is the torch, the crown, and the whip. Whip me, baby. The torch, the crown, and no, have I gone too far? Sorry, the sword, the crescent, and the sickle. The sickle's associated with the myth of the ancient god Uranus. So again, we're going to the planetary alignments. Mosaic 3 is the torch, the crown, and the whip. The burning torch was used by the priests of Ares, which is Mars, and carried burning torches as a sign of battle to opposing armies. It's a powerful thing. And again, we've got Roman soldiers are a very big deal when it comes to Mithraism. So the mystery philosophy here is beset, if you like, by Roman soldier symbolism, and that just makes sense anyway. Many ancient societies prior to Christianity, including the Egyptians, Indians, and Romans, used a halo or a nimbus circular sign, if you like, to suggest supernatural forces. That's this bit in the middle here. See that bit there? And, of course, the symbol of the whip or the sword represents the right of the goddess Nemesis to give what is due. Although I understand that symbolism and it's standardized, when you've got a masculine, no woman allowed philosophy, I'm not too sure where female goddesses fit into that, because there's nowhere else that they mention a female. The Phrygian cap, of course, is the signified freedom and the pursuit of liberty, and the sickle, which was used during years later, hundreds of years later, the Phrygian cap was used for the revolutionaries in France, if you recall, in a couple of shows ago when I was talking about that, with the Illuminati and their involvement in the French Revolution. The sickle, of course, the ancient goddess. So you've got this wonderful symbology. It's all mosaic. They've sat there and they've created this. They've created a hole in a cave, which takes a little bit of time and effort. And then on top of that, we've got this amazing leonine figure, which is representative too of ancient Egypt and the Sphinx. We've got this interesting correlation between a few different things. When you start looking at the relief and you start looking at the statues, you start to see things that we recognize. We've got the staff here and we've got the snake wound around, which actually in the end becomes what's it called? A caduculus? What's it called? The medical thing? Caduculus? Caduculus? I've got to squeeze one eye to try and remember how to say it. Caduculus, it's going to do my head in now. So for the medical symbol, but you're seeing the birth of it. You're seeing it starting to come through. Now, this figure is called. Are you ready? I've got to try and say this now. Leontocephaline. It sounds like a disease right there. It's a figure that was found in their temples, but not in all of them. And this figure is of a bearded man with 4 wings, entwined by a snake holding a scepter and 2 keys. The objects at his feet include a caduceus, hammer, tongs, pineco, and a cockerel. Thunderbolt is engraved on the breast, and sort of, there's a lot of speculations, but we can come down to this is the sort of generally accepted meaning which could be wrong, but the four wings carry the symbols of the four seasons, which makes sense. The thunderbolts, of course, were Jupiter, the king of the gods, or Zeus. The keys represent the keeper of the keys, the keeper of secrets, the keeper of knowledge, the ability to unlock the entrance to heaven, the keeper of secrets to the cult. But I've got more inclination from the way I read and feel this, that these people were not using this as a God-like figure. In fact, none of it. They were using it as an understanding of something far deeper, far more mysterious, far more exciting for me anyway, just saying. The hammer and tongs were associated with the Vulcan. Avenging fire was the symbol of the god. Caduceus means herald, staff of office. The Roman times it was associated with Mercury. We've got all our planets flowing on in here. The Roman messenger of the god is Mercury. Kaboom. The symbols of Asclepius, the god of healing, was a physician's staff. So that's what I meant. We've brought this forward. Or healing scepter. They used wands. A healing scepter is not a joke. It is something that was used properly in healing at some point in the past by healers, by spiritual people, by shamans, whatever you want to call them. I don't think for 1 minute that they went around with the staff and whacked people into health. They definitely used it to push energy through or to show energy. And of course, the snake symbolized rejuvenation, knowledge. In many ancient cultures, it also represented healing. The cockerel was also sacred to the god Asclepius. And the pine cone was the symbol of Sibyl and the great mother of all the gods and goddesses of abundance and abundant benefits. The pine cone is often depicted and shown because from such a small thing, a massive tree grows, and you can warm yourself with it. It has so many purposes. You can use it to scent water. The sap from the tree, the sap from the pine cone when it's green can be put in water, and it kills bugs. It's got a very strong antiseptic quality. In fact, you can buy a derivative of that called pine tar, which is used to get rid of rashes. It's used to, a little bit in water kills bacteria on the skin. So I don't doubt that it had a lot of value in a time before medicine. But with tauroctomy at its core, Mithraism was likely formed in the age of Taurus. In fact, not likely, we know it was formed in the age of Taurus, which is known as the second age of man. And now we are looking at the zodiac in a completely different way. That means that Taurus is held in sky in a particular place for more than lifetimes. And yet they understand that. They know that it's there for more than lifetimes. They've worked it out. They've mathematically worked out how long it's going to take to shoot through. Now, that's not just in their time. It's information brought forward from centuries, millennia before them as well. This is the astrological significance we see to modern man who are today talking about heralding in the age of Aquarius. And we understand that this is actually normal counting stuff, stuff that we can actually count. Only we seem to have it really reduced down to a couple of thousand years. The Chaldeans actually observed that timing of the 12 divisions of the zodiac constellation, which changed every 2,160 years. And it meant that there was a great year, and this is powerful stuff, a great year, which is the whole 12 moving through our system, lasting 25,920 years. They've got it down to 920. They've also got the 2,000 down to 2,160, and we come forward, and we've got the Earth's tilt and its last mash. Now, this is before we understood the precession. And precession is something that's very common knowledge now. It's very commonly worked. It's very commonly understood. But this is before then, before it was even known, before it was worked out. The Earth's tilt and its large mass at the equator, the gravitational forces formed the sun, moon, and from the sun, moon, and planets cause us to wobble. Okay, so we're actually like a wobbling top. We're not doing this perfect spinny thing. We've actually got a little wobble on like this, like a little top. And if you can imagine a top with just that little bit of a wobble going, then that's the Earth, and it's how it works. The wobble itself shifts and moves. So around about, are you ready? 2750 BC, Subin was the North Pole star. Today it's Polaris. So before it was called the North Pole, and now the poles are the word Polaris, the star at the North Pole, it was Subin. And so you actually go into any online astronomical chart, and you can look at Thuban, put in the date 2750 BCE, and it will show you where in the sky it was in relation to us. So it would have been the north, at the North Pole, exactly north, due north. And then, of course, everything else in relation to that. So what we now know today is that the precession is a normal function, and what we have learned really is that the ancients knew of these eras, which lasted, we say, about 26,000 years. They've got 25,920. How accurate is that? On average, it's not lost on me that the Chaldeans had this understanding 500 years before the birth of Christ and nearly 800 years before it was worked out by Hipparchus, who in, not 800 years, sorry, about 500, 600, 700 years, who in 128 years before Christ's birth, Hipparchus discovered the precession. When I say discovered, I mean discovered a new, which made it clear that before the Greco-Roman period, in which the spring equinox was in the constellation of Aries, the ram, the spring equinox before that after that had last been in Taurus, the bull. So what that did, just so as I'm not mind-boggling it, they're going, when is the spring equinox? What constellation is in the sky? Now, that constellation will be in the sky for 2,160 years, at which time will be heralded the next age of the zodiac. And so it's not when is it going to start. It's very much easier to work out when it's going to start. You can go and you can get the actual information of when the age of Aquarius actually starts, probably to within 100 years, or maybe because they have got 25,000, 2,160, I would say probably within a 40-year radius if they've already worked it out to that degree. I think that's exciting. I really do, because I grew up spiritually through a period of time where everybody's talking about it's impossible to know when the age of Aquarius is going to come in. You've got all these spiritualists saying that now, oh, it started back then, it's starting up here, but in actual fact, it's a very clean, clear line of not only when it started, but when it's going to finish. And so as we live through that age, we live through that age for that period of time. So the obvious symbol for the period of time, because Hipparchus had discovered this precession in which the spring equinox was in Taurus, the period of time that the Mithras were in play, that they were doing their thing, that they were meeting regularly, was in actual fact coming to the end of the age of Taurus. In the human terms, 40 years is still a long time. It's still a lifetime. You know, I've already been in this business from when I started, not professionally, but from when I started over 20 years. So if you think about it from that perspective, when I was a child, they were singing of the age of Aquarius. If you remember that song, that came out when I was pretty young. And so we have this understanding. My point would be that we don't have a lot of guesswork within when an age is going to start. It will be within somebody's lifetime, not over a period of 400 or 500 years, which is often intimated that, you know, it could be a very long time. I love that song too. It's just great. Do you remember Hair? I had hair down to my ass. Well, actually, I had hair down to my knees. I had to lift it out of the way when I'd go to the loo. And, terrible time. And that song Hair came out. My older sisters all made me dance to that song Hair and throw my hair all around. I think I was about 12, maybe 11 at the time. This is the age we're in right now. Yep, this is the age we're in right now. And it's not going anywhere fast. You know, it's going to be bang. It's in here, we're in it. And it's here for that duration. It's here for that period of time, somewhere in the region of, give or take, 2,160 years. So we will not see the other end of this age, all right? It's not going to happen, not in this lifetime anyway. So it's an amazing thing. So they were heralding out with their cult, with their system, with their belief. They were here. That's another inside of another. I really love these things, you know. Look at that, you know. It's just amazing to me. And these are reliefs. They're everywhere. This one's got seats. Isn't that nice of them? The Germanic one, they all had to stand in the back there, but this one's got seats. Quite amazing, you know. No comfort, and they would have sat in there and done their thing, had a feast, killed a pig, but quite funny. But they're heralding it out. So that's why they've got their symbolism. Basically, they're at the end of the Taurian age. They know they're at the end of the Taurian age, and they're devoting their time, their energy to understanding or to honouring that in some way. That's why the phenomenon of the procession would have been the death of the bull. It wasn't the killing of a bull as a sacrifice. It was about the end of the Taurian age. And the Taurian age is the industrial age. It was an age of knowledge. It was an age of getting things done. It was an age of force. It was an age of power. And when you look at everything that happened through that 2,500 years, it definitely was the scrabbling for power over and above and beyond. And for those that missed the earlier example, come and check out the slides afterwards, because I've got the original writings of what became our Bible. I've posted those there, and of course I talk about Constantine, and these were records that were kept by the scribes of the day who were asked to write it out. Once the procession was believed to be caused by this huge change, there's a question of, did they believe that it was caused by a god, or did they believe that something else was going on there? These reliefs, I'm so sure that I had a picture of the outside thing. There's a beautiful belt that shows. I'm actually going to go and find that, because I was so sure I had that. Actually, I'm never going to be able to find it. I was so sure I had that earlier, that you can see where an artist's depiction of here's the Earth, there's a static, and there's a belt that runs around the outside of it, and it's got the constellations on it, and it's a beautiful thing to look at. When we are looking at and understanding what these people believed and saw and felt and heard, it gives a whole new meaning to the amount of time and the amount of energy that they put into reliefs of this time. They're not worshipping it, and you can tell they're not worshipping it. There's no mention in any of their writings, these are gods as such, but these are the way that they were represented by the Christian authors of the day, the record keepers, that came later by a few hundred years, by the way, that are trying to interpret what they're looking at here and the small amount of writing they've got. If the procession was believed to be caused by a new god, then that god would naturally become the agent of the death of the bull, and therefore it becomes bull slayer too, by the way. So whichever way you go, you're heralding in a new age, a new era, and that's a few thousand years before now, right? So, and of course, there's an interesting thing about that. The sort of age going backwards. It's kind of a weird thing for the way that we look at our zodiac and our houses, and the way we've set it up seems to be quite a mystery in regards to the way that they've done it. So it's a fantastic thing, Mithraism. Now, it did die out in the end, 300 to 500 years. 300 years it was outlawed because of Christianity. But they still managed to limp along and keep themselves going till about 500 years after the death of Christ. And after that, they all fell into disrepair and disuse. But there are some beautiful, beautiful images out there of them, and there are a few reproductions that are in museums where they've actually reproduced the cave, so you can actually go and walk in and get that whole feeling of how it would have felt without actually destroying something quite amazing and quite beautiful built into the side of a rock. When you think about making something go 50 or 60 feet into a rock and make it 7, 8, 10 feet high and wide enough like a tunnel, you've got building skills, right? You've got energy, you've got equipment, you've got time, and there's over 200 of these that were built across Europe, all the way from Rome to England, to Great Britain. And they all have these beautiful reliefs. Whether one person or a small group of people were making them, I'm not too sure, but they are so similar that if you actually Google Mithraism and go to the images, you will see depiction after depiction. There's 600 odd of them that have been found, and they are all so close in the way that they're designed and set up and size that, yeah, it's pretty amazing. It could even be too that, you've got like a prophet running out from one place and going and putting them in another. But if you're going to herald out an age, there's a lot of questions around that. There's a lot of time. It's a lot of energy. So there's an understanding too that they were seeing in the time and their seasons based on the cosmos, based on constellations and the stars. That's their sun going around their constellations twice a year. There's spring and then there's autumn. And they're doing that rather than physical signs, rather than earthly signs. So they have a to-the-day equinox based on the cosmos and the stars, the constellations and the sun's movements, not based on Earth, the temperatures, how things change and switch. For example, our up north here in New Zealand, our autumn is very warm, very long. It's almost summery. You get your mid to late 20s during the day. It takes a while to drop off to cooler in the evening. It gets cooler in the morning. It's just starting to get colder now. We're virtually in winter. So our autumn is actually warmer than our spring. And then if I go down 5 or 6 hours down the country, they're having frosts, and so that's 0 temperatures in the morning. So to rely totally on your weather isn't going to give you a time that this is when the season actually changes, and it changes because of our movement, not because of just the weather, if you like. So next week, we're looking at Zoroastrianism. That's a big word, isn't it? I'll see if I can say that twice very fast. Zoroastrianism. I can. One of the world's oldest monotheistic religions. It was founded by the prophet Zoroaster in ancient Iran approximately 3,500 years ago. That's all very, very exciting. Now, on a psychic affair this week, 9:30 Wednesday, 9:30 p.m. Wednesday Eastern Standard Time, I am going to be looking again at reading flowers. So if you want to go grab yourself a photo of a flower, send it to me, post it to IntuiTalks, do whatever you like with it, but get it to me and I will read that for you. So flower psychometry is on Wednesday. Zoroastrianism is so exciting, so interesting, so amazing that I'm going to be really loving to share that with you. So everybody have a great week. Take care. And remember this week, don't be a part of your own problem. Ciao for now.